What's up guys, it's Pliskin here, and I used to do this series called Outer Heaven Armory. It's kind of like Pliskin's Picks, where I go over a certain gun in video games and then talk about its equivalent in real life, except I kind of narrowed it down to being just about Metal Gear. So for example, I would talk about the P90 and all of the Metal Gear games it's featured in. I talk about its appearance in 2, then in 4, talk about how it compares to the reality of it, and yeah, it was pretty good fun. However, I've kind of taken a step back from doing those kind of like weapon encyclopedia videos, at least as like a common thing on the channel, because there's just been a couple times where I like either get something wrong or like I'll say the wrong thing. Believe it or not, like you watch these videos when they're already well edited, for the most part. So you don't really see or hear how I trip over my words, I stutter a lot, I have a lot of those kind of issues, so there's some times where I'm talking on end and I'll just say the wrong thing. I'll mean one thing, but I'll say something else. So for example, I was going full force with these Outer Heaven Armory videos, but when I made the PSG-1 video, I called it the lever delay blowback operated battle rifle. I wanted that video to be a definitive, guide on the PSG-1 in Metal Gear and IRL. So when this happened,
lever delay blowback operated battle rifle.
I don't know, it just kind of really deterred me from doing this kind of stuff, because it's like one small little mistake, one misstep, one thing you pronounce the wrong way, or one thing I forget to edit out, and the entire video feels moot to me. So yeah, I stopped doing these. I do still want to talk about the weapons of Metal Gear and talk about their relation between, how they're portrayed in the game versus how they are in real life. While today isn't necessarily an Outer Heaven Armory, it kind of is. I don't know exactly how I'm gonna brand this, especially because today we're not talking about a weapon that is in Metal Gear. Instead, we're talking about a weapon that should have been in Metal Gear. So without further ado, welcome to another day in war without end.
Where'd you get McDonald's? McDonald's?
Now, I've talked about before how I really like pistols. I've had the majority of my training be with pistols. I feel most comfortable with pistols. The games that I've played growing up, usually my favorite games have a strong emphasis on pistols. There's this one game, I don't know if I've talked about it on this channel. It's called Halo Combat Evolved, and in that game there you have a pistol that basically acts like a DMR. And yeah, this pistol definitely made an impact on me. And then when I went on to go and play Metal Gear, I saw how much of a big deal Snake would make about different kinds of pistols. And the pistols, for the most part in Metal Gear, are interesting because they actually do a little bit of research and look into the actual pistols used by US Special Forces units throughout time. And it's interesting because you see the reflections of the pistols at their given time and in pop culture. So let's start talking about Metal Gear Solid 1. Here we have the SOCOM Mark 23 Mod 0. In-game, it's the only pistol and the only suppressed weapon that you have, so you're going to be using this thing a lot. It's pretty easy to aim, even with the game's like difficult camera angles and controls, because it has that laser sight on it, and a generous auto-lock system. And while shooting guys in the head isn't the meta yet in Metal Gear Solid 1, it is useful to just know where a guy is and just empty out a magazine hoping that he goes down. Most of the time it works, however there's some times where you'll shoot him where it won't auto aim right, and that adds a little bit of attention to the stealth. But yeah, there's a reason why this pistol here made such an impact as the solid Snake gun. Now the developers included the SOCOM because of its large blocky appearance, which worked well with the graphics of the PlayStation 1, but they also added it in there because this was, at the time, the US Special Forces go-to sidearm. You see, SOCOM, which is Special Operations Command something something, I don't know. US military acronyms are gay as shit, and half the time they're just really convoluted and you could just put something else in their place. Towards the later end of the 90s, they started trying to commission a pistol that they called a offensive handgun. Now, this was supposed to be a .45 caliber pistol with the capabilities of being suppressed and to have, be really reliable, sturdy, not a lot of recoil. And this ended in the large monstrosity that is the Mark 23. So yeah, the Mark 23 was made, and yeah, it could take a suppressor. It could also take that laser sight that we see in MGS-1. However, this thing is 5 pounds. Now, to give you an idea, an MP5K is around 4.5 pounds. So this pistol, which has a slower fire rate, is harder to aim than the MP5, is also heavier than it. And it got to the point where it's like, sure, this is a good pistol, sure, this is a reliable pistol, and its knickknacks are really cool, and the .45 works well with suppressors, but when you have this much weight and mass, isn't it just more practical to use a larger gun? So for example, if you just went in there with an MP5 SD, let's say, it would suppress a lot better, be a lot easier to aim with, and you have the capabilities of full auto. So this whole offensive pistol program led to a product that, while it was reliable and did what SOCOM wanted it to do, it wasn't really practical and got phased out pretty quickly and is considered one of the worst weapons ever utilized by US Special Forces.
Some people find it a little heavy and hard to use, but it shouldn't be a problem for you.
And this brings us to Metal Gear Solid 2. Now, in Metal Gear Solid 2, Solid Snake himself doesn't really use the SOCOM. Instead, he uses a USP-9, which again came out a little after the SOCOM and is seen by many to be an improvement. I mean, I don't need to tell you how venerable, popular, and reliable the USP is. Do a quick search on YouTube and you'll see people say the only issue with it is its greatly exaggerated cost because it's manufactured by H&K, which make guns that are, decent quality, but they overcharge for them. Still, Solid Snake utilizing this pistol for me is a little bit of a symbolic change. Because that SOCOM he hands off to Raiden. And in Metal Gear Solid 2, Snake is no longer the puppet. He's in control of his own actions. He's not being deceived by anyone. He is in the loop. Raiden isn't. Raiden is in the same place that Snake was in MGS-1. He's a pawn being used by his government and being lied to. So it's kind of, symbolic of this in the sense that Raiden gets that bigger, clunkier gun just because, the whole Solid Snake simulation, trying to replicate Shadow Moses and all this, and Snake being beyond all of that, is using a much more practical package. The one featured in game is a 15-rounder 9mm. It's a reliable gun. The flashlight is great. I'm a really big fan of mounting lights onto your weapons, since the majority of people aren't really going to have access to night vision and all this high-tech shit. Sometimes these simplest solutions are the best. If I have to talk about one difference between the depiction here versus MGS-1, it's that you can aim in first person, and specifically I like Metal Gear Solid 2's aiming in first person. With both the USP and the SOCOM, it's actually a really realistic depiction of how it is to aim your pistol. You see, in real life, if you try to align your iron sights on a pistol while you're on the move, or even, moving your arms around trying to shoot fast, it's going to be a very clunky and unresponsive experience. So you kind of get into the habit of more so aiming just with your body. So for example, if I'm trying to shoot a bunch of things in front of me really quickly, I'm not necessarily going to look down my sights. I'm going to look in the direction of what I'm shooting, and I'm going to let my muscle memory carry the majority of the weight when it comes to aiming. And in Metal Gear Solid 2, you actually get into the habit of doing this. You know, if you're defusing a bomb, then yeah, you're going to use your iron sights. But in combat, you're just going to draw the pistol and let out a bunch of rounds, knowing the general direction that you're aiming in and having a feel for how your pistol shoots. The majority of games made nowadays make aiming down sights really easy, and it just, stays locked on. Your rear sight and your front sight are almost perfectly aligned 24/7 and will shoot exactly where those sights are sitting, and pistols don't really work like that. You have the recoil impulse that has your shot deviate. Your sights are only, made to be accurate to like extremely close ranges, and you're gonna have to adjust for drop and all this kind of stuff. And Metal Gear Solid 2 really depicts the clunkiness of trying to aim with a pistol. So for both the USB and the SOCOM, I really like that. But before we can move on, we gotta talk about the M9. You see, throughout the majority of Special Forces history, and as suppressed pistols were, developed and created, in the old days, they came up with the idea that if you could stop the gun from cycling, you would reduce the overall amount of noise. So for example, let's take the M9 in Metal Gear Solid 2. The US military did utilize a version of the M9 that would have its slide just be locked, and it would not, self-feed. So you would actually have to rack the slide back with every shot like in the game. However, unlike the game, the gun would still be firing specialized 9mm rounds, subsonics or, supersonics through the suppressor here. But the idea was to have it just be quieter because you didn't have the gun cycling and you just had less moving parts, made it more reliable, a really niche and specialized stealth weapon. However, as suppressor technology got better, there wasn't so much of a need for this. But I do believe, and please fact check me on this, that this special version of the M9 was one of the last pistols to have this slide locking feature. Probably the most realistic depiction of this kind of gun in the MGS series is in MGS5, where you can develop the fictional Wu Trank pistol in 9mm. That's more of a realistic depiction of how these guns would work.
By the way, we haven't been properly introduced yet. I'm Snake. You can call me that from now on. And you? Interesting. A pair of snakes. Nice to meet you, Snake. I think we're going to get along just fine.
But yeah, moving on from Metal Gear Solid 2, in Metal Gear Solid 3, we still see this kind of slavish devotion to doing research to what the Special Forces units actually utilized, and we get two guns, one unremarkable, and one that's really freaking cool. Let's talk about the unremarkable one first. I've lost track over how many times on this channel I just showed that, clip of Snake freaking out over the custom 1911. And while 1911 pistols tend to be very nice guns for competitions, I still would never recommend them for self-defense or duty carry. The capacity is just not enough, and there are better options out there. It has a very nice smooth trigger, but I always will prefer a polymer striker-fired pistol with a high capacity. If it holds less than 10 rounds, I'm not really interested in the gun. But on that note, I made a video a long time ago talking about how the starter 1911 doesn't have a suppressor when you first come in, and I always play the game on extreme. However, while I was getting some footage for this video, I started a game of Snake Eater on hard, and holy shit, am I just on crack? Does this also happen on extreme and I never bothered to check? I don't know why I so firmly believe that there was no suppressor for this pistol, but whoever that commenter was that brought this up, yeah man, you were right and I'm seeing it now. But yeah, the 1911 is a given for Snake Eater, as Special Forces and infantry at the time were using the 1911, and even nowadays the Special Force units still use the 1911. However, it's more of a status symbol rather than a practical sidearm. I've heard arguments talking about how the 1911 is better than the Beretta because it's easier to maintain and there's less moving parts. So I'll listen to those kind of arguments, but if you put a 1911 and a Glock or a CZP-10, I take any of those guns over the 1911 any day. And again, if you want me to make a virtuality versus reality video for different forms of carry pistols, let me know down in the comments below. But yeah, the 1911 is here in Snake Eater. I don't find it too interesting. The gun doesn't really work that well in game. It's headshots or nothing. And yeah, it's just another 1911 in the video game industry, which is already saturated with millions of copies of a 1911. Now, what is really interesting is this MK22 Hush Puppy. Now, in game, it's another one of those tranq pistols. However, in real life, I believe, if research is in my memory still, that this pistol here was the first version of that slide-locked suppressed pistol. So remember how we were just talking about that Beretta being the last type of pistol that way utilized by, US forces? This was the first, I believe, and it's so cool that Snake Eater features this. Because I remember when I was doing the what weapons should Naked Snake bring with him, I started talking about how there aren't a lot of pistols that were suppressed in the early 60s. Suppressor technology was still relatively new. So it's not like today where almost anything can be, have a threaded barrel attached onto it and fit a suppressor. Back in the 60s, you actually had to find a niche gun, and the MK22 is definitely one of those niche guns. But yeah, at this point you might be thinking, Pliskin, what's the point of this? Is this just an overview of the Metal Gear pistols in the first 3 games? Is this just a bloated kind of virtuality versus reality, Outer Heaven Armory, Pliskin's Picks hybrid? And the answer is no. You see, my point in this video, and the reason why I've been outlining how all these different Metal Gear games follow the different pistols utilized by SOCOM and Navy SEALs and Special Forces, is because there's a pistol that really should be in Metal Gear, but it's never shown up. You see, in the 80s, the US military adopted the M9 pistol. And I've already brought up how certain units didn't want to use the M9 because it had a lot of moving parts and was hard to maintain in the field. However, starting from the 80s as well, Navy SEALs and other specialized forces would prefer the SIG P22-6, and this was kind of an unofficial sidearm of a lot of special forces units throughout the next 2, 3, 4 decades, where specialized US soldiers would utilize some form of a SIG P22-6. This is a double action, 15 rounder plus 1 in the chamber. It's a very reliable pistol. It actually beat out the Beretta M9 during the trials to become the US's new standard sidearm. However, it was more expensive than the M9. So it's confirmed to be higher quality in terms of reliability and performance than the M9. This is a really good, reliable pistol. And the only reasons that it wasn't adopted as the MK23 and all that kind of stuff was because at the time, it didn't really attach certain things like laser sights or flashlights, and it didn't come with a lot of customization for its barrels or its iron sights for night sights. So this pistol just kind of sat in the background. However, by 2011, this was officially adopted as the MK25. But while it was there in the background for the majority of the time, having other inferior pistols overshadow it, the SIG was always working as a US Special Forces pistol. And by the time 2011 came around, again, it finally got its time in the sun. Now, Metal Gear Solid 4 came out in 2008, so I understand that, even though the game takes place in 2014, they didn't really have knowledge of this gun at the time. However, with a little research, you could have figured out that the SIG P22-6 was a perfect gun for Solid Snake to use. And I'd even argue in Metal Gear Solid 2, instead of using the USP in 9mm, Snake should have used the SIG P22-6. It would have fit his overall character as being wiser, more savvy, not necessarily using what the military tells him to use, but, using his own experience and wits. That whole idea of not having any strings tying him down anymore, but still having that Special Forces heritage. The SIG P22-6 would have felt very welcome in Solid Snake's hands, and could have performed in a very similar way that the USP already performs in-game. And if Metal Gear Solid 4 ever gets a remake or a re-release, instead of that horrendous 1911 that tries to just, ride the dick of Snake Eater, I would like if they included the SIG P22-6 as the MK25. It has that classy look of the 1911 and could have all the tactical attachments that the Operator, the MK23, the M9, and the USP, all those guns had in past games as the Mark 25. And again, it would add another necessary addition to the Special Forces pistols pantheon of Metal Gear Solid. So yeah, you might be thinking, so Pliskin, you made a whole video talking about all these different guns just to say, hey, I think it would be a good idea to put the SIG P22-6 into Metal Gear. And yes I did. This is a Special Forces gun through and through, and would find its place very easily in any Metal Gear game that's time appropriate for it. Do you guys know about the SIG P22-6? I wouldn't blame you if you don't, because it doesn't really show up in a lot of games. Yeah, this thing has been in a lot of movies, it gets used by a lot of people in real life. I've had the chance to shoot this thing I think once, and while I prefer polymer striker fires, I really did like this pistol. And yeah, if it's gonna show up anywhere, it might as well show up in a game like Metal Gear Solid. But yeah, let me know your thoughts down below about the SIG P22-6. If you shot it, let me know. Do you think it would fit well into Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 4, or maybe even future Metal Gear projects, since the series seems like it actually has a future now? This has been Pliskin. The SIG P22-6 is a really cool gun, and I'll see you guys in the next video.
This is Solid Snake. Hey, subscribe to Pliskin Boy. God damn it.
You heard him.